Mike Tyson wasn't just rich, he was unstoppable. A force so dominant the world believed he could never fall until he lost everything. Here's the explosive rise and brutal fall of a man who earned over $300 million and watched it disappear faster than anyone believed possible. But to understand how Tyson lost everything, we first need to see the moment where everything started to go wrong, a moment that most people completely overlook. Because Tyson didn't lose his fortune in one blow, the downfall started years before anyone saw it coming. Mike Tyson's story begins not in a glamorous world of fame and fortune, but in the gritty, unforgiving streets of Brooklyn, New York. Born in 1966, Tyson grew up in a neighborhood where violence and poverty were part of everyday life. Life for him was a series of obstacles, from broken homes to criminal activities. But it was also a place where toughness was forged, where survival meant learning to fight both physically and mentally. Tyson's early life wasn't easy, but it created the foundation for one of the most extraordinary boxing careers in history. But hidden inside that chaos was the spark that would make him the most feared fighter alive. From a young age, Tyson had a natural talent that could not be ignored. He was strong, fast, and aggressive qualities that made him perfect for boxing. By the time he was a teenager, he had already been in trouble with the law, and fighting had become both a release and a way to assert control over his life. Enter Cus D'Amato, the legendary trainer who would see potential in Tyson where others saw only trouble. D'Amato took him under his wing, not just as a boxer, but as a young man who needed guidance, structure, and mentorship. With D'Amato's support, Tyson transformed. And yet, neither of them knew that this mentorship would become both Tyson's greatest strength and later, his greatest weakness. The boy from the streets became a disciplined athlete and the world began to notice. But behind the highlight reels and knockout victories, something darker was already rising with him. By the mid-1980 seconds, Mike Tyson's rise in boxing was meteoric. At just 20 years old, he became the youngest heavyweight champion in history, shocking the world with his power, speed, and ferocity. Tyson wasn't just a boxer, he was a phenomenon. Fans flocked to see him, promoters lined up to host his fights, and endorsements began pouring in. Suddenly, the boy who had once struggled to survive now had a life most could only dream of. Money, fame, and influence became his new reality. He was unstoppable. Tyson's wealth exploded at an unbelievable pace, and with every fortune earned, a new temptation followed. Multi-million-dollar fight purses, lucrative endorsements, merchandise deals, and personal appearances meant that by the late 1980 seconds, he was already a multimillionaire. Every punch he threw in the ring translated into fortune. He purchased mansions, luxury cars, private jets, and even exotic animals. Tyson's lifestyle was lavish, almost excessive, and it became part of his persona. Fans didn't just see a boxer, they saw a king living a life of absolute power. Tyson was on top of the world, a symbol of wealth, dominance, and ultimate success. If you're into stories like this one, take 1 second to like the video and subscribe to Fame and Fortune. Because what comes next is where Tyson's entire world begins to fall apart. But just as quickly as his wealth grew, cracks began to appear. The same aggression and impulsiveness that made Tyson a champion also made him volatile outside the ring. He had a complicated personal life, filled with tumultuous relationships, legal troubles, and erratic behavior. The man who had been tutored and disciplined by D'Amato struggled to maintain that structure once fame and money entered the equation, and as his spending skyrocketed, so did his problems. It's one thing to make millions, it's another to manage them. Tyson's spending habits were legendary. He bought 3 private islands, multiple mansions, luxury cars, helicopters, and a private zoo. He spent millions on jewelry and extravagant parties. Money was meant to reflect his success, but it became a symbol of his recklessness. He was earning hundreds of millions and spending just as quickly, often without much thought for the future. Financial advisors and friends warned him, but Tyson's focus remained on living in the moment, driven by adrenaline, fame, and the sense that life was meant to be lived fully and loudly. But it wasn't one mistake that destroyed Tyson, it was a series of cracks he could no longer hide. Then came the legal issues that would define much of Tyson's later life. In 1992, he was convicted of rape and sentenced to 6 years in prison. He served 3 years behind bars, and during that time, the public's perception of him changed drastically. The same man who had been a global superstar was now a cautionary tale. Tyson's fortune didn't disappear overnight, but legal fees, settlements, and a lack of active income began to take their toll. The shock of prison and the reality of losing control over his life marked the beginning of his financial unraveling. Tyson attempted a comeback after his release, regaining some success in the ring, but the challenges outside continued. The combination of poor financial planning, excessive spending, and legal troubles meant that his wealth started diminishing rapidly. Despite earning tens of millions in fights and appearances, Tyson's net worth began to plummet. Lawsuits piled up, taxes were unpaid, and the extravagant lifestyle he had become accustomed to became unsustainable. By the early 2000s, it was clear Mike Tyson, once the richest fighter in history, was now on the verge of financial collapse. And by the early 2000s, the illusion of invincibility was gone. Tyson was spiraling toward an end that would shock the entire world. Bankruptcy became inevitable. In 2003, Tyson filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, claiming debts of more than $23 million. For many, it was shocking. How could a man who had earned over $300 million lose it all? The truth lay in a combination of unchecked spending, poor financial advice, and personal turmoil. Tyson had lived a life of extremes, earning enormous sums, spending without limits, and enduring personal and legal struggles that drained his resources faster than most could imagine. It was a cautionary tale not just for athletes, but for anyone chasing fame and fortune. Yet, even in his downfall, Tyson's story was far from over. Bankruptcy forced him to reassess, rebuild, and find new paths to financial stability. He began to explore ventures outside boxing, acting, endorsements, and public appearances. His charisma and fame remained valuable assets, and he learned to leverage them in ways he hadn't during his peak years. Tyson's journey back wasn't immediate, but it showcased resilience. Even a man who had lost it all could claw his way back by understanding the mistakes that led to his downfall. One of the keys to Tyson's comeback was embracing his own story. He became a figure of public fascination not just for his victories, but for his mistakes, his humanity, and his honesty. Interviews, documentaries, and social media allowed him to connect with audiences in ways he hadn't when he was purely a fighter. He became a brand not just for power, but for redemption. Tyson's ability to transform personal tragedy into public engagement is a lesson in the modern world of fame. Wealth is fleeting, but narrative and influence are enduring. Tyson also diversified his ventures, investing in businesses such as cannabis, boxing promotions, and even a one-man show that drew massive audiences. These ventures allowed him to rebuild financial stability while controlling his personal narrative. Unlike the reckless spending of the 1,980 seconds and 1,990 seconds, Tyson learned to balance opportunity with caution. While he would never reach the dizzying heights of his first fortune, he achieved a form of stability that eluded him for decades. It was a new kind of success, one that combined financial prudence with personal growth. In many ways, Mike Tyson's story is not just about money, it's about human nature, temptation, and the consequences of living without limits. He became rich through talent, opportunity, and raw power. He lost it through impulse, poor choices, and the inability to control the excesses of fame, and he rebuilt it by embracing humility, leveraging his story, and finding balance. Tyson's life is a stark reminder that wealth can vanish as quickly as it appears, but resilience and reinvention can allow anyone to rise again, even from the deepest falls. And there's another lesson here. Fame and fortune are rarely about talent alone. They are about discipline, timing, choices, and the ability to manage both success and failure. Tyson's career shows how quickly the scales can tip when those elements are out of balance. But it also shows that redemption is possible. The man who once terrified the world with his fists now captivates it with his story, a story far more complex than a boxing record could ever show. Even after all the chaos, one of the most remarkable aspects of Tyson's story is how he turned his past struggles into influence and inspiration. He became a mentor to young fighters, a voice in discussions about mental health, and a living example of how extreme success and extreme failure can coexist in one lifetime. Tyson embraced his own mistakes publicly, showing audiences that vulnerability doesn't diminish power, it enhances it. Through podcasts, interviews, and public appearances, he built a new kind of wealth, respect, insight, and cultural relevance that no money could buy. This new chapter proves that sometimes, the richest things in life aren't in bank accounts or championship belts. They're in the lessons learned, the second chances seized, and the legacy rebuilt from the ground up. Mike Tyson became rich because he was the strongest, fastest, and most feared fighter in the world. He lost it all because money, fame, and power were never matched with the wisdom and stability necessary to preserve them. But in losing, he gained a deeper understanding of life, resilience, and the value of reinvention. This was fame and fortune where legends rise, fall, and reveal the truths the world never sees. Subscribe, because the next story is even darker than this one.